president, in my projection, and I'm not hard in this, is going to be re-elected without a single vote from Mount Kenya region. Without. So if he...
Wenyenchi, how are you doing? I hope you're doing fine. I missed you all. Anyway, there is a QR code on the top left corner of your screen. You can see it? Yes, you scan it if you want to buy us a soda. And make me also feel like the economy is booming the way Mbadi said. Anyway, Moses Kuria last Sunday was on JK Live, and he revealed some things, and he went ahead and boldly said that William Ruto will win in 2027 without Mount Kenya votes. Is this really possible, or is just somebody splitting hairs? Let's look into it and do a deep analysis into it. But before that, here's how the interview went about the numbers and all that.
Okay, a lot of people are saying, you know what, this was a pointer. Okala was a pointer. And they're asking now, in terms of political direction, is the mountain lost?
Let me say something. Lost to who? About who?
The president. Has he lost the mountain?
Let me say the following. We got 13% of the vote. If the president gets 13% of Mount Kenya, it's a very big win for him. It's a very big win. It's a bonus. It's more than he needs. It's more than he needs. Yeah? If next year the president in Mount Kenya region gets 13% of the vote, it's a bonus. It's the excess of what he needs. I was with you here before, 4 months ago, and I told you, and I repeat here again, and I'm gonna speak that when we come to the next point about the politics of 2027, that the president, in my projection, and I'm not hard in this, is going to be re-elected without a single vote from Mount Kenya region. Without. So if he wins the same 13% that he won in Olkarau, it can only be a bonus. And I'm saying, figures don't lie. It is liars who figure. Yeah? Figures don't lie.
But tell me something. If he doesn't get a single vote in Central, where does he go to make up for that?
See, this country, I'm dividing it into 8 political regions.
The provinces of...
Not really following that,
okay,
but maybe what I would call electoral blocks.
Okay.
The president has got, in my opinion, in my estimation, in my experience, 4 blocks with him. He's got the coastal block, the northeastern block. He's got what I call Kamatusa. You remember Kamatusa?
Yes, of course.
The Kalenjin, Masai, Turkana, and Samburu.
Yes.
And the Luo Nyanza block. Yeah, those are 4 blocks. And the distinctive thing about them is that the likelihood of him losing votes from this region is very low. In terms of registered voters, as we come to the close of the last period for mass voter registration, those accounted to around 10.2 million votes. I'm counting even the votes which are within the diaspora of those regions. For example, people from Nyanza, or people from Luo Nyanza who are in Nairobi are most likely to vote with their brothers and sisters from Nyanza. People from Mulembe Nation, for example, who are in Nairobi or Nakuru or Mombasa, are going to vote with the people from Western region. People, let's say, people from Lower Eastern who reside in Changamwe, for example, in Mombasa, are most likely going to vote with their brothers and sisters from the Eastern region. So the president's 4 core regions, the coast, the northeastern, Kamatusa region, and the Luo Nyanza, account for 10.2 million registered voters. Let's proceed from there.
Okay.
Now we come to the people from the so-called cousins.
Yes.
The so-called cousins block. That is Mount Kenya West, underlying the word West. Okay? And the people from Lower Eastern, and the people from Matiangi's backyard, which is Omogusi, which is again accounting for 9.7 million registered voters. So between these 2 blocks, we have got a difference of 500,000 voters only. So in terms of politics, that's what we call, as a tie, a statistical tie.
Yeah, it's a dead heat.
It's a dead heat. It's a dead heat. But the 4 blocks that are, called to President William Ruto, the propensity, the likelihood that they're going to lose any of the votes is very low compared to the 3 regions of the cousin, so to speak. Then we come to the 3rd region, the region of what I would call the Ohio. I'm sure you know about American politics.
I do.
The Iowa.
Yes, Iowa.
The swings.
The swing states.
The swing states.
Yes.
And we've got only now 2 left.
Which is Mount Kenya East?
Mount Kenya East and Mulembe Nation. Mount Kenya East and Mulembe Nation. So that it boils down to that. It boils down to that. So question number 1. How solid is President Ruto's 4 voting blocks? Very solid. Now let's come, before we come to the swings, let's come to the cousins, the 9.7 million,
yep.
Within Mount Kenya West,
yes.
Kambani, and Omogusi.
Omogusi, yes.
Yeah. Within these 3 regions, there is an old story about someone who was having a goat, and there was a lion, and there was some grass. So if he leaves the goat with the grass, the goat is going to eat the grass. He leaves the lion with the goat, the lion eats the goat. So he was forced to cross with 1, 2 things and then cross back. You remember that story?
Yes.
That's exactly how the cousins vote are. You leave Matiang'i with Kalonzo, Kalonzo eats Matiang'i for breakfast. It's
I like where you're going. No. If you leave Kalonzo with Matiang'i?
No, Kalonzo will eat Matiang'i and Matiang'i will walk away.
Na kama kawaida, we'll have to start with a story. Now imagine a farmer who walks into a market and tells everyone, I already have 10 million chickens. People look at him and ask, where? He points at 4 different villages. There are chickens there. But are they yours? They speak my language. Have they agreed to come? Why would they refuse? And the farmer goes home and starts calculating how many eggs he will sell. Ladies and gentlemen, that is how Kenyan politics works sometimes. Politicians see a region, count its registered voters, attach a political preference to it, and suddenly, boom, the votes are already in the bag. But there is one small problem. Voters are not chickens. They don't come with ownership certificates. And that brings us to Moses Kuria's explosive claim that William Ruto can win 2027 without Mount Kenya. Kuria has just thrown a political grenade into Mount Kenya. Former CS Moses Kuria has made a very bold argument. According to Kuria, Kenya can be divided into 8 electoral blocks and Ruto already has 4 of them. Coast, Northeastern, Kamatusa, which simply means Kalenjin, Masai, Turkana, and Samburu, and Luo Nyanza. Kuria estimates these 4 blocks at approximately 10.2 million registered voters and argues that they are solidly behind Ruto. His most provocative statement, if Ruto gets only 13% of Mount Kenya, that is a bonus. In other words, Kuria is basically telling Mount Kenya, you are important, but apparently you are no longer compulsory. And politically, that is a very dangerous sentence. Because Mount Kenya has spent decades being treated as one of the most important pieces of Kenya's electoral chessboard. Now someone is saying, we can win without you. That deserves a serious examination. First, let's look at the numbers. Kuria's argument is not completely crazy. The 2022 IEBC register had about 22.1 million registered voters nationally. Ruto won that election with 7,176,141 votes against Raila Odinga's 6,942,930, a margin of only about 233,000 votes. Stop there, because that number tells us something extremely important. Ruto did not win 2022 because he had an overwhelming majority of Kenyans behind him. He won by a relatively narrow margin, which means the 2027 election does not require Ruto to win everybody. It requires his opponents to fail to build a coalition capable of beating him. and that distinction is enormous. Now, this is where Kuria's argument becomes interesting. Imagine Ruto actually consolidates 4 large regions. Then imagine he gets some support from Mount Kenya, some support in Nairobi, some support in Western, some support in other swing areas. Suddenly, he doesn't need to dominate everywhere. He just needs enough votes to cross 50% plus 1 of valid votes cast nationally. That's the mathematics of Kenya's presidential election. So Kuria's argument should not be dismissed simply because Mount Kenya is large. But there is another side to this equation. Here's the biggest problem with Kuria's calculation. He is treating political regions as if they are bank accounts. Coast, Ruto account. Luo, Ruto account. Kamatusa, Ruto account. Northeastern, Ruto account. Total 10.2 million. But Kenya's votes didn't sign those accounts over to anyone. They can change their minds. They can abstain. They can split their votes. They can vote for different candidates. And they can completely ignore what political analysts predicted. The ballot paper has no button saying, vote according to Kuria's spreadsheet. And there's another problem. Even Kuria's 4-block calculation contains enormous internal diversity. Take the coast. Can we really say every voter in Mombasa, Kilifi, Kwale, Tana River, Lamu and Taita Taveta is automatically Ruto's? No. The 2022 presidential results themselves demonstrate that regional voting patterns are not perfectly uniform. Take Luo Nyanza. Is every Luo voter automatically going to vote for Ruto? Again, no. The political environment of 2027 will be different from 2022. Raila Odinga's death has fundamentally altered the political landscape. New alliances are emerging, new candidates are appearing, and ODM itself is fighting over its future. So Kuria is making a projection, not reading the final result from a crystal ball. The Mount Kenya message is the real story, but forget the arithmetic for a moment. The most politically explosive part of Kuria's statement isn't the 10.2 million, it is the message to Mount Kenya. Because this region has become accustomed to being politically quoted. Every election, Mount Kenya is decisive. Mount Kenya must choose. Mount Kenya will decide. Now Kuria is saying, actually, if you give us only 13%, we'll be fine. That change, not 14, I mean 13%. That changes the it changes the psychological equation. Now, come to think of it, this could be a strategic message from Ruto's camp. Maybe Kuria isn't merely predicting the election. Maybe he's negotiating with Mount Kenya through television. Think about it. If Mount Kenya believes Ruto absolutely needs its votes, then the region can demand things, running negotiations, cabinet positions, development promises, political protection, succession guarantees. But if Ruto can convince Mount Kenya, I can win without you, the bargaining power changes. Suddenly, Mount Kenya isn't negotiating from, you need us. It is negotiating from, we need to decide whether we want to come along. That's a completely different political relationship. And Gachagua is listening. This is where Kuria's statement becomes particularly relevant to Rigathi Gachagua. Gachagua's political strategy is heavily connected to the argument that Mount Kenya remains indispensable. His political selling point is essentially, Mount Kenya has numbers. Mount Kenya must negotiate from strength. Mount Kenya cannot be taken for granted. Kuria's arguments attacks that foundation. Because if Ruto can genuinely assemble a winning coalition without Mount Kenya, then Gachagua loses one of his biggest bargaining weapons. But here's the irony. Ruto himself benefited enormously from Mount Kenya in 2022. The region was crucial to his victory. So telling Mount Kenya, we don't need you anymore, could be politically risky. Because voters have memories, and politicians have a very dangerous habit. They remember what voters did for them only until they stop needing them. Mount Kenya has enormous was enormous for Ruto in 2022. Across the traditional Mount Kenya counties, Ruto received millions of votes and dominated the region. That means replacing those votes is not a small exercise. You don't wake up one morning and say, today we'll replace 3 million votes with vibes. You need actual votes, actual turnout, actual mobilization, actual agents, actual candidates, actual political alliances. And that is why Kuria's claim needs to be treated as a scenario, not a settled mathematical fact. Here's the number politicians don't like talking about. Registered voters are not the same as votes cast. In 2022, around 22.1 million people were registered, but total presidential votes cast were much lower. So when someone says this region has 2 million registered votes, the next question should be, how many will actually vote? And then, how many of those will vote for your candidate? And then, how many votes will your opponent take? That is where political mathematics becomes complicated. And without forgetting, 2027 has another variable: new voters. IEBC 2026 Enhanced Voter Registration Exercise shows the electorate is changing. By April 9th, IEBC reported more than 875,000 newly registered voters during that phase of the exercise. The Commission was targeting 2.5 million new voters during the exercise, and in the subsequent June to July registration phase, the electoral register continued to expand. So the 2027 electorate is not simply the 2022 electorate with different t-shirts. There is a new generation coming in, Gen Z, and that generation may not respect the traditional electoral block mathematics in the same way. Now, this could be Ruto's biggest advantage or his biggest trap. If Kuria is right and Ruto has genuinely diversified his coalition, that is extremely powerful, because historically, Kenyan presidential candidates have depended heavily on regional strongholds. A candidate who can win significant support across multiple regions becomes much harder to defeat. But there is a danger. If the strategy becomes, we don't need Mount Kenya, Mount Kenyan politicians may respond fine, then we don't need you either, and suddenly, the bonus becomes the breakup. Now, you may ask, is Kuria counting voters or negotiating power? This is my biggest question, because Kuria is an experienced political operator. He understands electoral mathematics and also understands political messaging. And he knows exactly what happens when a statement like Ruto doesn't need Mount Kenya hits the headlines. It creates pressure. It triggers reaction. It forces Mount Kenya politicians to respond. And suddenly, everyone is talking about Ruto's alternative coalition. That may be the point. Now, let's flip the question. Suppose Ruto actually gets overwhelming Kalenjin support, strong support in parts of the coast, strong northeastern support, substantial Luo support, some western support, some Nairobi support, and even a modest Mount Kenya vote. Then yes, Ruto could absolutely be competitive without dominating Mount Kenya. That is mathematically plausible. But here's the catch. The four solid blocks cannot simply be assumed to remain solid. Politics changes. Economic conditions change. Candidates change. Coalitions change. Local politicians change, and public moods change. The 2027 election may become the great Kenyan who needs who contest. Ruto says, I can win without Mount Kenya. Gachagua says, Mount Kenya is decisive. ODM says, we can negotiate. Kalonzo says, we must unite. Matiang'i says, let's find the formula. Western politicians say, what about us? And ordinary Kenyans are somewhere in the corner asking, can somebody please discuss the price of unga? Kenya's electoral politics has repeatedly taught us one painful lesson. Politicians talk about communities as blocks, but behind every percentage is an actual human being. A farmer in Murang'a, a boda rider in Kisumu, a trader in Mombasa, a teacher in Bungoma, a student in Turkana, a business owner in Garissa. They are percentages. They are not percentages. They are citizens. And the danger of block mathematics is that politicians start believing they own people's votes. They don't. So, the big question is, can Ruto really win without Mount Kenya? Yes, mathematically, it is possible. But Kuria has not proved that Ruto already has 10.2 million guaranteed votes. Those are two completely different statements. The first is electoral mathematics. The second is political prediction. And the 2027 election is still open. I think Kuria's statement is less about telling us who will win, and more about telling us how Ruto's camp wants the political battlefield to be understood. It is a message to Gachagua, a message to Mount Kenya, a message to opposition leaders, and perhaps even a message to potential coalition partners. Ruto is no longer dependent on one region. If that narrative succeeds, Ruto's bargaining position improves dramatically. But if the opposition manages to consolidate the regions Kuria considers Ruto's, then these 10.2 million solid votes suddenly become 10.2 million votes as being aggressively contested. And that is the difference between a political slogan and an election. So, what do you think? Is Moses Kuria revealing the mathematical reality of Ruto's 2027 strategy? Or is he deliberately sending Mount Kenya a message? If you don't come back to Ruto, don't expect him to come looking for you. Because if that is the game, then the battle for 2027 may not simply be about who gets Mount Kenya. It may be about whether Mount Kenya still has the bargaining power it had in 2022. And that is a much bigger story. If you want Kenyan politics beyond the slogans, beyond the tribal arithmetic, and beyond the microphones, subscribe to HiiStory. Because we don't just count the votes politicians claim to have. We ask where those votes are actually coming from. And in 2027, that distinction could decide everything. Bye, and don't forget to scan the QR code on the top left side of the screen and buy us a soda. Bye.